Many years in many fields of profession, I've learned one sentence. One of the basic mistakes you can make in your life is to trust a guy you cannot control and counteract. WHO cannot be controlled by the people, and therefore people would be unwise to trust WHO just because they have some phrases in their constitution. Therefore, each transfer of basic competencies of the state to WHO is contra-democratic. It cannot be seen in a different way. If you ask what is the basis of WHO, WHO is one of the most important hindrances, impediments on the way to sell what you want to sell as a pharma firm. Yes? They check the medicines, they check all the medical issues, they give permission, they give a recommendation, etc. So they might stop or might help the firm to get the products on the market. And now, a quick look at the development of profits in the field of vaccines. In case you look at the firm's balance sheets in the field of vaccine, firms of pharma in the field of vaccines, you will see pharma firms up to 2019 did not really gain profits in the field of vaccines. The development of vaccines was very expensive and very time-consuming due to certain checks and tests you had to do. Starting from 2020, the balance sheets have altered. Vaccines are a real cash cow now. Vaccines based on mRNA can be produced cheaply. And in a situation in which WHO says, well, we need vaccines, don't waste time with testing. Bring them to the user. This time, it's really cheap to produce and to sell vaccines, and you can make tremendous profit. Look at the charts of the firms. Look at the development of profits. And I cannot share the view of Shabnam, who said there would be corruption at the display, or there would be a conflict of interest. To my opinion, there's no conflict of interest. On the one hand, you have a couple of firms ready to pay money to get the allowance to sell the products. On the other hand, you might have a couple of public health clerks ready to take the money offered by the firms. That's a complete match of interests and not a conflict. Now to Austria. In Austria, you find a reflection of those problems in the decisions of the authorities, the courts, and of the Austrian Constitutional Court. For example, the Austrian chambers of medical doctors, the Ärztekammern, those are specialized authorities for medical doctors, which are the controllers of their work. They can grant a permission to work as a doctor and they can recall this permission in certain cases, in certain circumstances. And so, in the last year, many procedures in Austria have been started at 9 chambers of medical doctors, saying, we want to recall your approbation, your permission to work as doctor, due to the fact that, for example, you wrote an article saying that vaccines would be ineffective or they would be dangerous. That's a crime, because you have shaken the minds of all those guys who might have taken those vaccines. They say no. This doctor wrote in his articles, vaccines might be dangerous, so we do not want to get vaccinated. This is a crime. Some authors in Austria say this is a crime close to murder, because he killed the man by Henry taking vaccination, and so by getting infected, and so by dying by COVID-19. And those doctors, of course, say, well, that's nonsense. I just mentioned my opinion. And that's the connection with WHO. The authorities said, no, there is no freedom of opinion. In the case there is a state-of-the-art result of science. There is a state-of-the-art result of science concerning vaccines, and so you are not allowed to mention your opinion. Another case was a doctor had written a testimony. A doctor had written a testimony for a patient who wasn't able to use filtering face piece type 2 or FFP2 mask. And this doctor was confronted with the recall of his appropriation due to the fact that he endangered the public due to the fact that he said this man does not need to wear a mask. He took the risk that this man would infect the whole society. That's close to murder. And so we have to recall the doctor's permission. And in some cases, our Court of Constitution have helped us in the past, not now. We went to the Court of Constitution saying, for example, those regulations are breaches of the Constitution because they have no legal basis. Such a regulation may be made by the Minister of Health in case of emergency. We presented to the court 50, for example, 50 testimonies, 50 papers of important scientists saying there is no such situation. Constitutional Court decided, well, we are not ready to check the scientific basis of a regulation. In the papers of our laws is written, the Minister of Health has to look at an expert's ideas, then experts' results, and then to make this regulation. We have only to check whether the minister had looked at the expert's paper. We have not to check whether the results of the so-called expert are correct or not. So we do not read your papers of your scientists, of your experts. We say it's enough that we have seen that the minister had read one paper. And a second decision of the court said, we had mentioned there was a regulation concerning the lockdown, and we said there was no reason for lockdown. And the court said, well, there was a paper written by the Commission, by the Austrian Commission on COVID problems, and this paper, only scientists, not lawyers, this paper said there would be danger. And the fact that the minister had based this regulation on this very single paper was enough to match the Constitution. The Constitution does not force us to check, to prove whether the scientific ideas in this paper are right or wrong. When WHO says there is a pandemic, then our ministers are entitled to use all the instruments concerning pandemics without checking whether there is a pandemic or not. That means we have a transfer of power to people who are not elected, who are not legitimated democratically, who are no lawyers, who are no judges, whose decisions cannot be checked, whose decisions cannot be recalled. And that means the end of the democratic play. And therefore, we have to stop such developments as the development concerning the pandemic treaty. Pandemic treaty would mean we have a couple of guys we do not know personally, we do not know anything about the funding, but they formulate political and legal decisions. So we have to stop them. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Georg, for your country report from Austria. Thank you very much.
Well, now everybody, we have a great honor to introduce you to Leslie Manukin, who is president and founder of the Health Freedom Defense Fund USA. Thank you so much, Leslie.
Holly, thank you, and thank you to everybody else who is here and who is fighting the good fight to defend our freedoms, our liberties, our national sovereignty, and everything that we hold dear, because this is truly a fight for humanity. What is at stake? What is at stake is literally the future of humanity. President Ronald Reagan, whether you think he was a good man or a bad man, said that one of his biggest fears was that over time, a controlling authoritarian socialist state would be introduced and foisted upon the world under the guise of health. It's very clear that when any leader in the world obtains too much power, it's almost impossible for the people to push back against that. We know from history that when industries obtain too much power, they then prey on an unwitting public. In the United States, the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act was signed into law in 1986. And since that law was introduced, which provided protection from any liability, financial or legal, for the vaccine makers, the vaccine schedule in the United States has tripled. We must pay attention to history in order to understand our future, right? We know that we repeat it if we don't. We know that when government leaders and industries obtain too much power, it is used against us. And that is what is happening now. The World Health Organization, under the guise of public health management, wants to usurp power from each and every one of our nations and from each and every one of us by implication. This is why I started the World Freedom Declaration, but I want to make it very clear to everybody who's watching and listening that this World Freedom Declaration, which you can find at worldfreedomdeclaration.org, please sign it. It was a collaboration amongst all of the people on this call and dozens of organizations. Children's Health Defense, my group, Health Freedom Defense Fund, the Solari.com or Solari Incorporated, Stand for Health Freedom, the World Council for Health, Doctors for COVID Ethics, and many other groups. Over 4 dozen organizations signed on as signatories, with hundreds more. I think it's about 500 more organizations signing on as well. And then we've had nearly 75,000 signatures. But we urge every citizen of the world to go to worldfreedomdeclaration.org and sign on. And the reason for that is simple. The World Health Organization and all those who represent us at the World Health Organization need to know that we are watching, and that even though they may not be directly accountable, we will hold them accountable. It is imperative that every citizen of the world sign this, because if we get millions of signatures, we can take it to our honest public servants and ask them in each of our nations to stand with us in defense of our health freedoms and our rights, to stand with us in defense of our national sovereignty. It is a tool not just to get names, but to garner publicity and attention from those who serve us. It is very clear that in the last couple of years, those who pretend to serve us do not serve us but another master. But it is through this kind of international collaboration with all of these groups and millions of global citizens that we can come together and use our collective voice to pressure those in power to do our bidding, not the bidding of special interests or out of control groups like the World Health Organization. Everyone needs to understand that although many of the amendments proposed have been tabled, they are not gone. The pandemic treaty will come back. It's still being considered and negotiated. And there are all sorts of mechanisms in these treaties and the International Health Regulation proposed amendments which would accord extraordinary power to the World Health Organization, such that they would have a compliance committee which would be responsible for enforcing what happens in your nation. Let's be clear. If these things go through, the World Health Organization is an unelected, unaccountable body. It will have blanket authority to define a pandemic, to assess when one is happening, to enter your country to tell you that there is something happening, and then to insist and direct how the response is conducted. Individual nations, individual regions will not have a say. The documentation used to say explicitly that the World Health Organization would confer together with the individual nation in question, but that language has been stricken from the documents. So I don't want to belabor this point, and I don't want to reiterate what so many have said, but this is a threat to your bodily sovereignty. It is a threat to every citizen on the planet. If you want some unelected, unaccountable bureaucrat who cannot be sued and is not financially or legally liable for anything they do to direct your life, then go ahead, go back to sleep. If, however, you want to stand together with us in defense of these ideals, which I hold dear, and I know billions of people around the hold dear, then please sign worldfreedomdeclaration.org and stand with everyone on this call and all of us who are opposing the tyranny that is being attempted on each and every one of us. Thank you very much.
you so much for all the work you do. Right, we're going to go straight over to John Titus, an American attorney, on positioning the World Health Organization in the larger landscape. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Polly. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Good afternoon, Europe. Good morning, United States. Again, as Polly said, my name is John Titus. I am a federal litigator here in the U.S. I've been doing that for 25 years. For the last 7 years, I've had a YouTube channel, now also a BitChute and an Odyssey channel called Best Evidence, that talks about a lot of the topics that we were talking about here today, including sovereignty, the rule of law, corruption, and transparency. My channel, however, focuses also on another issue, namely financial and monetary issues, which I want to touch on here briefly today for reasons that will become clear. All of the topics that we are talking about, they're becoming increasingly important as private companies move into and take over spaces, public spaces that are traditionally reserved to the democratic process, like health, and they do so. The private companies move into these spaces under two different guises. It's really a 1-2 punch, as we've seen and we've heard about today. The first sort of gambit is there's a crisis, the most recent example being a pandemic. There's an emergency that justifies the suspension of the normal democratic process of transparent deliberation. The pitch is there's a panic, we need to act fast, and we need to act now. And number two, the second part of the 1-2 punch is, because we need to act quickly, because it's so important in the face of this crisis, we can't leave decisions to ordinary lay people and citizens in the democratic process. We need to turn the decision-making process over to experts and let these so-called experts decide. That, in a nutshell, is the premise of the WHO's new draft international health regulations. It's really suspend democracy and let global experts decide what's going to happen. And I want to take a couple of minutes to explain where this comes from. It's very important. It is not an accident. This feint really is not original to the to the WHO. It's actually a page from someone else's playbook. And you need to understand whose playbook this is, who those people are, and why they are so very dangerous. It is no accident that the new international health regulations are coming from, were proposed by the Biden administration, the U.S. executive branch, because it is the U.S. executive branch that is where the 1-2 expert punch, where that move started. And it started in the wake of the global financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. In the wake of that crisis, the economy was very fragile. And as crimes of Wall Street began to come to light, crimes that really drove the crisis, as people looked at what created the crisis, a lot of crimes by Wall Street started to come to light, particularly in the mortgage-backed security space. But yet, despite the crimes coming to light, the executive branch was refusing to prosecute Wall Street no matter what the circumstances were. That people like myself are like, well, what's going on? You have the Department of Justice, which is in the executive branch. It never prosecuted Wall Street banks. It never prosecuted Wall Street bankers. It would only prosecute small-time chiselers. The home flippers or the small-time hedge funders, way far away from Wall Street. And finally, what happened toward the end of Obama's first term is that UBS, which will be near and dear to Swiss attorneys, UBS, which is also a major Wall Street bank, it's a primary dealer. It deals with both the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury. It's a very important Wall Street player. UBS admitted to conducting or perpetrating wire fraud in connection with rigging LIBOR. And yet still, despite its confession, like Bernie Madoff, nobody went to jail. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, refused to prosecute. And I want to play a clip from the DOJ itself so you can hear their words, it's not my words, and you can see what they're saying about why the UBS was not prosecuted in that case. And I want to just highlight a couple of people here real quick. This guy is Lanny Brewer. He is the Assistant Attorney General in the DOJ. He is flanked by Eric Holder. Right here, Eric Holder is the Attorney General. That is a cabinet position. He answers directly to President Obama. And they're talking about UBS Securities, as I mentioned, and Lanny Brewer has just explained why UBS is not going to be prosecuted, is going to go to jail. What they do not tell the people there in the press corps, these two guys, is they are both from a law firm called Covington & Burling, which actually represents all of Wall Street, including UBS. They don't mention that. And that's an important thing, because I want you to listen. Eric Holder is going to step in here and rescue Lanny Brewer, who's just been annihilated by the press corps about why they're not prosecuting. Listen to what Holder says about why UBS gets off the hook.
Let's be honest, yeah. I mean, that's a factor. I'm not talking about just this case, but in others that we have resolved. The impact on the stability of the financial markets around the world is something that we take into consideration. We reach out to experts outside of the Justice Department to talk about what are the consequences of actions that we might take.
Okay, you got that? So we reach out to experts, and the experts tell us, oh no, you can't follow the law. That would upset the stock market. The market is still very fragile, the economy is fragile. In other words, it's just like here, we have an emergency. So the next question is, who are the experts? And I want to play you another clip from one of the same guys there, Lanny Brewer. It's the only clip you will ever see where anybody in the Department of Justice actually reveals who the experts are. The guy who's going to speak here is Lanny Brewer. You just saw him. He's Assistant Attorney General. Listen to what he says about why the DOJ or who the people are in the collateral consequences. He reveals who they are. In this clip here, he is talking to the New York City Bar Association. Listen to what he says.
We are frequently on the receiving end of presentations from defense counsel, CEO.
Oh, sorry about that. Here we go.
We are frequently on the receiving end of presentations from defense counsel, CEOs, and economists who argue that the collateral consequences of an indictment would be devastating, just devastating for their client, and that even global markets will feel the effects.
So in other words, in the wake of the crisis, the economy is fragile, and the crimes that Wall Street commits, they're not being prosecuted because experts are coming into the DOJ, and when Lanny Brewer just reveals there, it's actually the CEOs and economists from the very law firms that are being prosecuted. So that's the reality. It was defense counsel, CEOs, and economists. And so he was saying, well, the global market's going to feel the effects. So the DOJ, the end result, has never prosecuted Wall Street, despite the fact that they're confessing to crimes like Bernie Madoff did. To be clear, the decision to ignore U.S. law and not to indict Wall Street came from Wall Street itself, and it came disguised, just like here, as experts advising the U.S. executive branch on what to do in an emergency, the emergency there being a fragile economy, which is exactly what you have with the WHO experts rendering advice, the benefits of private parties funding the WHO. The WHO website actually admits, if you look at it, that the second largest donor to the WHO is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I'm just going to cut to a graphic. From there, you can see Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is second in the list of donors to the WHO, $751 million, and that is only in 2020 and 2021. That's a lot of money that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is donated, and I want to highlight the fact that Bill Gates is on record talking about how he personally profited from vaccines. So I want to cut to this clip and just listen to what Bill Gates tells CNBC here.
You've invested $10 billion in vaccinations over the last 2 decades, and you figured out the return on investment for that. It's kind of astounding. Can you walk us through the math?
It's been $100 billion overall the world's put in. Our foundation has been more than $10 billion. We feel there's been over a 20-to-1 return.
I think the numbers that you ran through were, if you had put that money into an S&P 500 and reinvested the dividends, you'd come up with something like $17 billion, but you think it's $200 billion.
Here, yeah.
Okay, so Bill Gates has put $750 million into the WHO in the last 2 years, and he's put $10 billion total into vaccines. Query what role the WHO plays in Bill Gates achieving a 2,000% return on his investment. Well, for one thing, the WHO conceals all facts that do not promote the advantages of vaccines. It is basically an advertising agency for vaccines. Take a look at what the WHO says on its website about Pfizer vaccine. It is quite interesting and revealing what the WHO's website, their own website, says about Pfizer vaccine, and they will pay attention